Thanks, Avon. Sorry, folks, for joining you by phone rather than being present in the Zoom room. We had a little bit of technical difficulties here. So this is what we're going to make work. And I think Linda Hanson with the League of Women Voters is having the same problem I am. And so she'll be joining us on the phone. The League of Women Voters of Indiana is one of our co-sponsors tonight, along with Indiana Vote by Mail. And Barb Tully of that organization will have an update. And the NAACP Indiana State Conference is a co-sponsor as well. And their state president, Barbara Bolling Williams, is going to tell you about a successful project we've worked on up in Gary, Indiana. And then last but not least, Kelsey Kauffman, who is someone who redistricting activists got to know a couple cycles ago, I think, when she was working with some students at DePauw University on prison gerrymandering. She's now developed a lot of expertise on local redistricting. And that's an issue that is important and relevant today across Indiana. So Kelsey will be bringing us up to speed on that. But I'm going to start out. Again, our purpose tonight is to bring you an update. We are at the halfway point of the Indiana General Assembly. And there have been several election issues moving through the process. Most of them not so good, but some positive. So we'll talk about some of the bigger election issues that have surfaced this year down at the State House. And I'm going to start, and what I want to focus on is House Bill 1116. House Bill 1116 is sponsored by the chairman of the House Elections Committee, Tim Wesco from St. Joseph County. It's a bill that does several different things. A big chunk of the bill we don't really care about. It has to do with per diem payments to county election officials for various voter registration responsibilities. So we don't really care about that part of the bill, but there are two parts that we do care about. The first one actually has to do with local redistricting. It was an amendment that was added in the House Elections Committee specifically for the city of Gary. The city of Gary's mayor asked for this amendment and did get it successfully in the bill. It would extend the deadline for local governments that missed last year's deadline, the deadline for cities, towns, counties, school boards to redistrict after the most recent census was December 31st, 2022. So if it's not been done by now, local governments are late. And so Gary missed the deadline. They came to the General Assembly and asked for this and got it. The language would extend the deadline, not just for Gary, but any local government in Indiana to March 15th of this year. So after the primary election. And really the most disturbing part of the bill is that it would give the Secretary of State responsibility for redistricting of local governments if the local body who has responsibility for redistricting does not take action. And, you know, it's really, we think it's very bad practice to have a statewide elected official, partisan elected official, in charge of local redistricting. So we object to that part of the bill. And really, even the more onerous part of the bill is a third section dealing with disenfranchisement of anyone who is convicted of felony vote fraud. Now, let's be clear, the impact of this would be very small. because almost no one in Indiana is convicted of felony vote fraud. But this law would prescribe a 10-year period post-conviction for anyone convicted of felony vote fraud. They would be disenfranchised. They would not be able to register. They would not be able to vote. Now, this runs counter to Indiana's current policy on disenfranchisement. One of the very few bright spots in our election law is the fact that we do not permanently disenfranchise convicted felons. We don't disenfranchise people for any amount of time post-release. So we object to this language in House Bill 1116 because it's major backsliding on the issue of disenfranchisement. You know, there is no evidence that there's any sort of, positive effect on disenfranchisement. This isn't going to stop anybody from committing a crime that is already extremely rare. So although we recognize this bill would have a limited impact, it's one of those camel in the tent issue. You know, the camel gets its nose in the tent with this exception for vote fraud, and then the General Assembly comes back next year and then another type of crime is designated for disenfranchisement. So we think, people, once they've fulfilled their sentence, they've come back into the community, we think that people should be encouraged to participate in elections, to be civically engaged. So disenfranchisement is it's a bad idea across the board. And again, House Bill 1116 takes Indiana backwards. This bill has not been scheduled for a hearing in the Senate yet, but I'm predicting it will get a hearing because, again, of that section I mentioned on per diem payments to the clerks. This bill is important to them for that reason, so it is likely to show up on the Senate Elections Committee calendar. For that reason, we would ask you to contact your state senator and ask them to oppose any law that seeks to disenfranchise anyone convicted of a felony post-conviction in Indiana. This bill also, it perpetuates the big lie. Traditionally, if we are going to increase the penalties for a crime, it's because it's rampant. We've got to stamp out this problem. And that's not the case with election fraud. Again, it's rare, it's isolated, very uncommon in Indiana. So let's not tailor laws to the big lie. Let's look at reality, and this language is simply unnecessary, and it's wrong-headed, takes us in the wrong direction. So again, please contact your state senator and ask them to vote against any language in House Bill 1116, which would serve to disenfranchise people. So that's our first update. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Barb Tully. No, I'm sorry. I think the order that I wanted to go in next was Linda Hanson at the League of Women Voters. She's a co-president of that organization. And Linda's going to talk about some success that we had this session already. So I'll turn it over to Linda.
Right. Thank you. Julia, I'm sorry. I actually got on just about the time you got on there, started to talk. So maybe you can get on again.
I'll try.
Yeah. I'm glad you're all here. And yes, this one is a success, at least for this session. I'm talking about Senate Bill 188, and also there was a bill in the House, a comparable one, HB 1428, that would have created partisan school boards. The idea of partisan school boards itself is a real concern because our school board members should be elected on their qualifications, their merits, their experience, and a platform, no matter their political party affiliation, because their primary task is to work for all children, not partisan or select groups. And that's a problem if you are looking at a school board that has to look at what a particular party has asked of them. So patronage could become a problem. The politics might compromise the ability of school boards to put students first. We also have a teacher shortage. This would have complicated that because there are teachers who would not want to stay, besides the ones who are already leaving for other reasons, but who would not want to stay if they are under the aegis of a partisan school board. So new teachers could choose to begin their careers in states where public schools are not run by partisan school boards. Others who are leaving the profession could leave temporarily and move to another state or simply retire, as some are doing. So we spoke against this. We had lots of allies speaking against partisan school boards, including the school board, State School Board Association and Indiana Vote by Mail, Common Cause. We were all there to speak against making our school boards partisan. And before, I will say that before Senate Bill 188 was heard, they actually reversed the order that morning and heard SB 177, which set the dates for candidates to file for candidacy for election. And rather than having school board candidates have to file at the same time that those who were filing for primaries had to file, they changed that to filing after, well, the day that registration could start again after the primaries. So once that was done, and that was an amendment that morning, that pretty much said they were not going to vote for partisan school boards in the Senate Election Committee, which made it a lot easier to testify that morning because I thought there was at least a positive response going to come from the election committee, at least the ones who were paying attention. And in the House, so that one died. It did not get out of committee. They didn't call for a vote on it. And then in the House, that one died as well. But I will say that there is, we still have to watch for this. There are other bills out there that talk about election matters that set dates for candidate filings and that sort of thing. There's always the chance that something will be added at a last minute amendment and get voted through. So we have to keep watching for that. But at the moment, this is one positive out of this legislative session. We're not looking at partisan school boards for the next year. Oh, I should add, one of the other things that was in the House bill that Representative Prescott put out was that there could be local control over whether these school boards would be partisan or not. School boards themselves could vote to be partisan, or it could be decided otherwise in a local election. They made an exception. They were going to make an exception for having it on the ballot for electors to decide that. That would have created a really confusing array of options across the state, something that was not a positive. Fortunately, that died. So from the good news, we go to the others that we have to keep watching.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank
Oh, sorry, Julia.
Yeah. No, I will turn it over to Barb Tully with Indiana Vote by Mail to talk about House Bill 1334, which is in the news a lot this week. And I did just want to mention to folks, I taped a segment of Indiana Lawmakers that was dedicated to the issue this morning. So that will be broadcast on public television stations across the state this weekend. So please tune into that. I get a little feisty with Tim Lesko, so it's not as boring as Indiana Lawmakers is usually. So take it away, Barb.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. So House Bill 1334 ended up being very different from its introduced version. Its introduced version, which is the one that's filed when the session starts, it had a provision in it that would have limited absentee balloting even further. So Tim Wesco, the chair of House elections, excuse me, really hates mailed voting. Hates it, hates it, hates it. And so he tried this last session and it ended up getting killed in the Senate bill. And in this introduced version this year, he had the same restrictions again, which was if you're going to fill out an absentee ballot request, you're basically saying you can't show it up at all on election day or at any time during the early voting period, that 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it is during, the month before the election. That got killed before it left the House. And they amended it in a couple of other ways, equally as, well, nearly equally as awful. So today, as many of you know, we apply for an absentee ballot online, or we apply for an absentee ballot on a piece of paper and send the piece of paper in. And you can, on the paper application, you have a choice now, or what they're proposing as part of 1334. They're saying you can supply your full driver's license number and the last 4 of your social, and we have to be able to match that if we're going to send you an absentee ballot, the clerk's office, the election office. Or if you don't supply those 2 things, a photocopy of your driver's license. And much like Julia's comment earlier, where it's the camel under the tent, like what are they going to do next? They're going to require it for all absentee ballot applications and not just say it's an or. So bad idea all around. I think there are a lot of people who think that this is a perfectly fine way, that it brings, in fact, Tim Wesco said this, that it's a perfectly fine thing to require. It just brings absentee voting in line with in-person voting, either early or on election day. You have to show an ID. So now you're showing an ID to vote absentee. Well, we're matching signatures. Like that's not really useful. Tim Wesco thinks that signature matching is not adequate, which means he really doesn't understand the process of signature matching. And really, it would basically invalidate any vote that's been done in a vote by mail state where they have cast millions and millions of ballots with no problems. So the photocopy as an option instead of your driver's license number and your last 4 of your social on a paper application is what we're objecting to. There's a couple other things in the bill that are not great. So it wouldn't permit, and this is an ad, this was not in the introduced version, it wouldn't permit any political subdivision, so a county clerk's office, for instance, from sending out en masse absentee ballot applications. So if you worked at a retirement community and you were the activities director, and you would normally call your local clerk's office and say, send me 100 applications, I'll have the residents fill them out, we'll get them back into you. That this bill is proposing that be done, which doesn't seem like it's useful. And then also in this bill, a lot of very additional complicated procedures added to clerk's offices for the way they have to handle absentee ballots and notify voters if the ballot isn't complete or they can't match the numbers or something like that. Nicole Brown was there, who was the chair of the Legislative Services Committee for the County Clerks Association. I was surprised that she said she was neutral on it. I would have liked it if she would have said she was negative on it, but she said she was neutral. And it gives county clerks a lot more hoops to jump through, and not good for that reason altogether. So for 1334 in particular, we want to object to the driver's license requirement and on the paper application, and also to the not being able to send out masses of absentee ballot applications.
And this bill was heard in the Senate Elections Committee on Monday, but no vote was taken. We know they talked about an amendment being prepared. I would expect that amendment to focus on sort of tightening up how this cure process is going to work, because, you know, they anticipate that this is going to cause applications to be rejected. They already know that. The law anticipates it. But the process they set up is pretty vague. So I expect them to try to tighten that up. But the problem is that, you know, a clock is running. You've got to have your absentee ballot application in by 12 days before the election. And so that's a really, you know, early cutoff. And so it takes a while. You know, the county will have to have a few days to get back to people, tell them that the number they submitted didn't match with what is on file. So then the voter will have to get back in touch and figure out, okay, well, this is the number then. So again, it creates a number of different pitfalls. And, you know, because Indiana's vote by mail law is very restrictive, 66% of the people utilizing it are senior citizens or people with disabilities. So, you know, they're the folks who are least able to jump over these additional hurdles that the state is setting up for them. And, you know, as Barb said, it was disappointing that the Clerks Association testified as neutral on the bill, because they hold a lot of sway. And if they had said, and you know, it was frustrating because she didn't say anything positive about the bill, talked about how much additional work it will be for the counties to execute, but they just wouldn't say that they were opposed to the bill. And you know, that's politics. The majority of county clerks across the state are Republicans, and they don't want to oppose this Republican bill. But we need to start, you know, encouraging. That's one of the things that folks can do if you have a relationship with your county clerk. Encourage them to reach out to our state senators in particular and explain to them how much this is going to slow down the process. It's an additional hassle and additional headache for those folks at the local level who are trying to fulfill these absentee ballot requests. So that's House Bill 1334. And now we want to switch gears, get out of the State House a little bit and talk about local redistricting, because, you know, in 2020, we have the new census. We know what the population is for all communities around the state. And all communities have a responsibility, if they run elections in districts, to equalize the number of people in those districts. And I was shocked late last year, I was contacted by Kelsey Kauffman, our local redistricting expert tonight, and she told me that a shocking number of communities in our state ignored that responsibility and did not get the job done by the deadline, which again was December 31st of last year. So I will turn it over now to Kelsey, and she can tell you all about it.
Great. I'm really excited to be talking to you all about this. I want to start by contrasting local government redistricting with congressional and legislative redistricting. So congressional legislative redistricting is high profile, it's highly partisan, and it's inevitable. In contrast, local government redistricting, at least in Indiana, is low profile, almost never partisan, and usually doesn't happen at all. So this was something that my students and I discovered in 2011, just by chance. We weren't looking for that, and we just stumbled across it, and we kept on getting more and more curious about it. It turned out that a very small number of counties redistricted their county councils, and an unknown number of school boards and municipalities in the following year did so. And one of the problems was that the state elections division was advising local governments, specifically the counties in 2011, saying that local government redistricting is optional, and that they were not required to do it. And that is patently false. There are many places in the Indiana Code that discuss local government redistricting and are quite directive that you have to do it. And in addition to that, there's a whole body of decades of case law, federal case law, and Barbara will be touching more on that when she talks. So we began in 2011 with this battle with the Elections Division about whether or not local governments had to redistrict. And in 2013, my students and I released a web page that I recommend to everybody. The site is called indianalocalredistricting.com. So just exactly what it is. And we analyze 88 of the counties, not the 4 largest, but the other 88, and we analyze them and for their maps and their data and their past practices, and found that the vast majorities of counties did not redistrict, and some of the ones that didn't do it properly. So we kept on with that. And in fact, some of the counties then did redistrict after we released our website. But the big time, of course, was 2021. And that was a compressed year because of the pandemic. But we were able to, and hold on a second, I'm going to close this chat thing. It distracts me. In 2021, we were focused on 2 of the 3 types of local governments that are required to redistrict in Indiana. So the 3 types are county councils, all of which have to redistrict, school boards, some of which have to redistrict, and towns and municipalities where first-class, second-class cities have to redistrict, most third-class cities have to redistrict, and an absolutely unknown number of the 550 towns have to redistrict. So one of the things we did in 2021 was that we launched a real effort to find out which school boards had to redistrict, because nobody in the state knew which they were. The School Board Association didn't know it. The Elections Division didn't know it. The Department of Education didn't know it. And most importantly, the school boards didn't know it either. So we were able to identify the 30 school boards out of 250 or so in Indiana that had to redistrict, and happily all but 12 of them redistricted last year. And 70 of the counties did. So huge, huge improvement last year. And I'm talking 2021. I'm still in 2022. So in 2022, we then tackled the municipalities of the second-class cities. All but 2 redistricted, Gary and Anderson being the 2 that didn't, and 2 of them, Columbus and Noblesville, looked to have done it improperly. All but 8 of the larger third-class cities and towns did it. And the problem is that nobody knows which of the 500 or so towns and cities that are below 10,000 population, nobody knows who has to redistrict among those. Okay, so the legislature has been actually quite unhelpful in all this. They did support us back in the day in 2011 against the Elections Division, and most legislators did. But last year they passed 1285, House Bill 1285. And what that did is that it prevented any local government from redistricting mid-decade. And remember, I said that after our website came out in 2013, identifying which counties hadn't redistricted, that then 25 of them did on their own between 2013 and 2016. So House Bill 1285 blocks that. Instead, they say the only way they can redistrict after December 31 of this past year is for there to be a lawsuit. And Barbara's going to talk about our first lawsuit under that bill. And, maybe good for us, but bad for local communities. And then this year, as Julia has said, there's House Bill 1116, and it has this weird provision in it that gives an extension until May 15 of this year, which is right in the middle of the election year, for cities and towns. And you absolutely should not redistrict in the middle of an election year. It's not even clear. It doesn't clarify as to whether does that change the districts that the candidates have just won the primaries are going to be running in. It's a badly thought out bill. I'm actually in favor of giving the extension, very much in favor of it, but it should be until the end of this year, or even better, the end of next year. And I think it'd be possible to bring people to their senses that you can't redistrict in the middle of an election year. So most of the local governments that haven't redistricted are cities and towns. So it's a terrible idea having the Secretary of State try to redistrict 450 towns. I think that won't go well. So that's basically it. It's an exciting area, and I would really welcome some help on it. We're all volunteers. And Linda in particular in the past and League have been very helpful. We've been doing this. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey. And last but not least, Barbara Bolling Williams was our individual plaintiff in the challenge to the unconstitutional Gary districts. So Barbara, why don't you give us the story about that?
Yes. Okay. First off, I've known Kelsey for I don't know how many years, probably about 10, 15 years, and well respected. So it wasn't like somebody who I had no information about or any pre-notion about contacting me. She contacted me. It was so cute. She contacted me early December because, again, remember the municipalities are operating under a December 31st deadline. So early December, she calls me up and I said, well, and wanted to talk about the fact that Gary hadn't redistricted. I'm like, well, Kelsey, let me call you back. I'm on my way to my family Christmas party. and so she calls me back. Of course, I never called her back. She calls me back again and she says, well, really, we really need to, Gary needs to get this done. I said, okay, Kelsey, I'll see what I can do. So I made a couple phone calls and I found out that the city council was meeting about it. And so I thought, okay, well, that's all we need to know. They're going to get it done. I don't need to interject myself into this process any further. Well, they didn't get it done. So now I get my phone rings again and Kelsey says, well, they didn't do it. And so we're wondering if you can help us find a plaintiff, preferably in the 3rd district, who would be willing to sue the Gary Common Council. And I laugh because I'm like, well, Kelsey, I live in the 3rd district. And you can imagine, my thoughts about that, in that, here I am getting ready, I always try to keep a low profile, especially in my home city, because, I'm doing a lot of things around the state and I have a president in Gary, so I try not to step on any toes. So I said, okay, I will do it. And so we had to find counsel. Bill Gross, who is very well known to, fighting for rights, voting rights. We've been involved with lawsuits along with Common Cause and with the League in the past. And so very familiar with Bill. And so Bill was going to be counsel for this lawsuit, but he was looking for local counsel. So of course, I knew a lot of attorneys here in Northwest Indiana, Lake County. I'm an attorney myself by profession. So I called up a couple of my friends and said, would you be especially ones that work in federal court, would you be interested? And got Tracy Kauffman, who agreed, and she was very excited to do this. She was very, very excited to do this. So we started down this path. Certainly Kelsey's assistance and expertise was extremely helpful. And Julia, although wasn't directly involved with this, was very supportive. We worked together for many, many years. In fact, Julia introduced me to the world of redistricting, I guess probably over 10 years ago, in the 2010 census and redistricting 2021 effort. So and then we actually received a grant called for redistricting, and we used it as connecting the dots, which talks about how redistricting and the census and then voting plays all in one big ball of voting and voting rights and protection. So we did that. So we filed, filed the lawsuit. Of course, this is over a period of time, and at the first hearing, the attorney from the council says, "Oh well, Barbara Bolling Williams just wants to get her name in the paper, and she's just doing this for publicity's sake." I'm like, okay, so we're off and starting. But the law is clearly on our side. They couldn't dispute the fact that they had not voted on any maps. Our maps were 24%, I believe it was, Kelsey, 24%. There was a 24% deviation. The law does not give you an exact number for that your maps can deviate from the utopia of being all the districts being 100% equal. That's not going to happen. But they recognized that, and they said that maps that are over 10% are presumptively unconstitutional. And again, Gary's maps were 24%. So, it was clear that the law was clearly on our side. We had the first hearing, and the judge wasn't happy. Primarily, he wasn't happy that this has now fallen in his lap. So he kind of suggested to the city that they may need to see if we couldn't come to some resolution, because we knew that it has to be that the judge had to be the one to make a decision. Again, the city council had lost their right to redistrict, but it turns out that we were able to work it out. The city council voted on a map that was, what was the deviation, Kelsey? I can't remember. 5%.
I think it was 7.5.
7.5%. So under the 10%. But we had a couple maps that Kelsey's son had drawn for us, and our best map was like 3.4%. But that map would have probably move incumbents, but more importantly for us, it would have moved people who had already candidates who had already filed for election, and it didn't seem fair to do that to them. The incumbents, they had their chance, so we weren't so much concerned about incumbents, but we were concerned about candidates who, like I said, through no fault of their own, we were in this mess. And I think going back to the pending bill, I was at 1199, the one that the Gary amendment. Going back to that bill, is that having the Secretary of State to draw the maps and make the decisions all of a sudden interjects a lot of politics, and politics is already in there. But it's the people who would have the ear of the Secretary of State would be able to possibly not draw the fairest maps that they could. And we know that we specifically want an independent body drawing the maps. We have advocated for that for years. And instead, what do we do? Instead of saying, they could have said, let's establish an independent commission now that, that the city council didn't get it done. But no, they say, let's go find a politician out of Indianapolis to draw the maps up here in Lake County, which they don't even know where Lake County is, apparently. So it's a bad, that bill is really bad. But we were able to, like I said, get the job done, come up with an agreement, and adopt the maps that's much better than it was. Not the best one, but it kind of met all the criteria that we were concerned about, and the judge was happy that we had reached this agreement. And he didn't have to, but the law was clearly on our side. I mean, there was cases out there where he didn't think he even had the authority, but there were cases that had been decided here in the state of Indiana that clearly gave him that authority. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Barbara. And it was a really nice thing to watch unfold. I think the whole way the settlement worked out, it allowed the Gary Common Council to still have a say in the process, although, it did come under a court order. So there was still a local hand in redistricting, certainly better than, as you say, having a downstate partisan politician draw maps for the people of Gary. So we look forward to, being involved in more of this litigation at the local level, to get those local governments who haven't fulfilled their responsibility to get the job done, have districts that respect the principle of one person, one vote. And so stay tuned. We'll be looking for individual plaintiffs in many of these communities around the state. So stay tuned. Now we want to open it up for your questions. Savon, do you want to talk about the process for that?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Julia. And thank you all for your participation. So to the folks at home, feel free to add a question to either the chat or the Q&A feature here on the Zoom channel. We'll be able to accept that either way. I will ask the first question while we are waiting for a couple of others to come in. I believe this question was during Kelsey's segment, and this one was, in what manner was Noblesville's redistricting incorrect?
So I need to check this, but I'm pretty sure that they had non-contiguous districts. So I think that's the problem, but I need to check that and make sure I have the right map for them.
Awesome. And the next question that we had, Kelsey, was also directed to you. Did you say that you were with a college for your work, and if so, which one?
Yeah, I was with DePaul University, but I'm retired now, so I still get help from my former students from DePaul, which is great. And I would welcome anybody else who'd like to, to help.
Kelsey, you want to put your email address in the chat if anybody wants
sure.
to contact you?
Yep. Great idea.
And I will say that I put the website in the chat too. So Kelsey's website is in the chat too.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you both. And while we're waiting for more questions to file in, Linda, I see that you sent a message to the group a little bit earlier, I believe to a question that a Janet Williams asked. So if you don't mind just talking about that to the entire group.
Yes, I was trying to send it to everyone, but I screwed up. So anyway, so Janet had asked whether the two bills to make school boards partisan were actually dead. And so I tried to explain, if a bill does not pass out of committee and then pass its respective chamber to go to the other chamber for the repeat process halfway through, then it's dead for the session. The House bill actually passed out of committee, but it failed on the second reading in the House. So it died. It did not go to the Senate. And the one thing that then we have to watch for is whether language from either the Senate or the House bill shows up in some other bill, unrelated even, and has to be worked out in a conference committee. So that's what we keep watching for. But essentially, with the dates set in SB 177 for filing, it looks like the intention, at least coming out of the Senate, is that they not do it this year. But as I said, we have to keep watching, and we can watch for dates in another bill, or we can watch for repeat language from either of these. So that's where we are.
Well, and the other thing that could happen is they could stick it in an education bill. It wouldn't necessarily,
Right.
last year the Senate started it out in an education bill. Well, let me say though, that I think it's unlikely. I mean, anything can happen in the General Assembly, and there are definitely people who are motivated behind this issue. But the bill failed in the House because the author didn't call it down on third reading. That means
Right.
he didn't call it down because he didn't have the vote. So the good news is that our advocacy worked. So I think we have to stay vigilant and, be mindful of the vehicles that are possibly out there. Now, the other thing is that is good for us is these would have to be Senate bills. And, the Senate is a lot more particular about the issue of germaneness. So they really would be hard pressed to stick this in anything outside the education or election realm. So
Yeah.
unlikely, but, with the General Assembly, anything is possible. And what was really interesting to me is that there appeared to be like certain hotbeds, certain areas where disgruntled school board candidates, those people who ran and weren't elected and blamed it on there not being enough transparency about partisanship, those are the people who came and testified in support of these bills, like Brownsburg. Lafayette seemed to be a hotbed, Carmel. So I would definitely be watching legislators from those areas because, they've got some constituents egging them on this issue. But let's hope it's dead for this year.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting about that bill in particular, or those bills in particular, were last year when these bills were first proposed. And the State Superintendents Association, from districts all across the state, and all kinds of professional organizations were going, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And maybe one person was testifying for it. This year, they've gotten organized. This year, it was probably about 60-40, 60 against 44. And it was just stunning. So they'll try it again next session if they can't get it done this session.
Oh,
And some of those
absolutely.
people who were
It's not
speaking-
going away.
Some of those people who were speaking in favor of it were saying nothing more than they would know who to vote for if that person had an R or a D next to their name. Nothing about their qualifications or their positions or anything. It was just,
Right. And it's clear that this is a perpetuation of the culture war. The same
Right.
people who are worried about pornography in libraries are the people who are in school libraries, are the people who want partisan school boards. There's definitely a line connecting all of this.
Thanks all.
Other questions?
Yeah, our next question is SB4, the health bill, has a section that enlarges local boards of health, but requires that 2 board members, quote, be unaffiliated with any party. Doesn't that mean that those board members would be unable to vote in the primaries?
Well, that's a really good question. And yeah, that is kind of how we determine partisanship in Indiana, right? Because we don't register to vote by party. And so really the only way to determine partisanship is, which primary people choose to vote in. And so, yeah, that will be add some difficulty in implementing that because you're going to have to find people who are pretty apolitical, who aren't voting in primary elections. So, yes, that's what that would mean.
Thank you. So our next question is centered around HB 1334. Would that require applicants to enter both their social security number and either driver's license or state ID number? If both of those can't be submitted, is it correct that a person could then send a picture of their driver's license or state ID?
That's what they're proposing. Yes. On the paper
Yeah, it's either
application.
or.
On the
It's
paper
either
application.
or.
So either driver's license, full driver's license number and the last four of the social, or not those things and a photocopy of the driver's license. But again, it's a slippery slope because then they'll take out the word or next year if they get it past this year and make it a requirement for a paper absentee application. So we don't like it for that reason.
And I guess that we also said about this affecting, senior citizens more than anybody who, overwhelmingly try to vote absentee ballot. But how are they going to send a picture? You saying taking a photocopy of it with their camera, and then how do you send it?
Well, so that was also one of the complaints at the testimony on Monday. It was, you're saying photocopy, and that's the only way this can be submitted. That then somebody has to have transportation to get to a place and then pay for the photocopy. And this isn't a poll tax? Yeah.
Plus, I mean, disabled people who are not driving, as well as senior citizens who are not driving, you just continue to add more and more people who are going to be disenfranchised by this.
Right.
Right.
And it's,
Well,
and
and,
the question I see, it's someone said 1134, it's 1334. The Secretary of State did not testify on Monday. So 2 points, because I saw the earlier question about the Secretary of State, and I have a comment about him in just a second, but he did not testify on 1334. And I haven't seen him. I don't know. I was gone for a couple of weeks. I don't know that he has been to, he may have.
Oh, no, he keeps an extremely low profile.
Well, and so
He
the
did
second
send a
comment,
representative. He sent a representative for one of them.
oh, probably.
Well,
Somebody,
Brad King is sort of his
Mouthpiece,
go-to,
yeah.
the co-director of the election commission. But yeah, no, Diego Morales, good luck finding him inside the State House. Yeah.
So early in the session, when I was part of Indiana Vote by Mail, I was meeting with Greg Walker, who's on as Republican on Senate elections, and John Ford, who chairs Senate elections, and just, meeting some of the senators and just saying, okay, so what are we going to love and what are we going to hate that's coming up this session? And one of the first things, and we were on the top floor of the State House in that warren of cubicles that they have up there. And we couldn't find it. We couldn't get a conference room. There were three of us. And we're talking to Greg Walker. So we're standing around a copy machine with interns going back and forth, legislative aides going back and forth. Other legislators are in the area. I mean, these cubicles are truly small. And he was like, yeah, we're watching the Secretary of State's office based on its current occupant, and we're not going to let anything crazy happen. And I about went, well, then why did you vote for him? But I mean, it was pretty openly acknowledged with other legislators around that, like, and in fact, out of the Senate bills in elections this year, there wasn't a bunch of crazy stuff. There was just some administrative cleanup stuff, but nothing really that was kind of terrible, like comes out of House elections. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting.
Well, and we've seen that pattern. I mean, last year the Senate made one of Wesco's bills a lot less objectionable,
Right.
with some amendments. So I can remember when the days it was the opposite. It was sort of the House was the voice of reason and the Senate was pretty extreme. But those days have definitely changed.
Right.
Any other questions?
Yes. Staying on the topic of HB 1334, we're getting a couple of questions about the assurances that absentee voters may have about the sensitive information being secure. Does that concern anyone?
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. Yeah.
I wouldn't send in a paper copy of my driver's license.
Yep.
I mean, you just don't know what could happen to it. So yeah, I think, the sensitivity of this personal information, people's reluctance to share it, we all have concerns about identity theft. So I think communicating those concerns to legislators and the risk that this bill puts people at is definitely an argument we need to continue to make. Because, I mean, we've all read the news in the 2020 election about attempts to hack into voter databases in states across the country. I mean, that's a reality. So if we're going to be storing all this sensitive, personally identifying information in the voter files, I mean, people have real concerns about that.
Yeah. Our next question, pinging back to the Secretary of State, kind of similar to something that was discussed a couple of minutes ago. Has he at all been outspoken during this session in ways that would cause concern?
That I've heard.
Literally, he's not said a word. I mean, he's making headlines for all the wrong reasons, like creating a new position to hire his brother-in-law. But we're not, we're not. Diego is definitely not a policy heavyweight. And he sends the Republican co-director to legislative committee hearings. But no, he talked a lot of smack to win the Republican nomination, and then really backed off of that. Most of his extreme, he wanted to cut the 28-day early voting period down to 2 weeks. Require photo ID for anybody applying for an absentee ballot. He backed off all of that, and I don't think there is support among the greater General Assembly for the more extreme positions he took before he got the nomination.
Right. Our next question. In 2021, the IGA removed the state retirees' 13th check for a 1% COLA. Has there been any word about reinstating the 13th check this budget session?
I cannot answer that. Can any of our other panelists?
Not following that.
Sorry.
I suspect if there had been anything, we would have seen something about it. Out of the Indiana Capitol Chronicle, at least.
Right. Yeah.
Alrighty, and then our final question, unless folks have anything else to add, how might people bring to account the state election division for stating that, quote, local government redistricting is optional?
Well, that was Brad King, who's not much of an improvement, I don't think, over the Secretary of State. I remember at one hearing, he wagged his finger at me and my students and said we were the only people in the state of Indiana who cared about local redistricting, and why didn't we just drop it? And we responded, because it's state law. It doesn't matter how many people cared about it. So he's a bit of a disaster, I'm afraid.
And I think the only way to hold them accountable is to, do the activism to force local governments to, be responsible and do their job, which is, what we're out to help Kelsey and others do.
So one of the things that's always struck me is how little legislators know about local government redistricting, which is why it concerned me that last year and this year, they had bills that responded to a local issue in one place and then passed bills that would affect everybody, and is actually making the situation for local governments worse rather than better. It makes them more liable to expensive lawsuits, for one thing. So there's really an important distinction between electoral districts and residential districts. I'm not going to go into it, but almost no legislators that I've talked to, including the top leadership, have any clue what the difference is between those two. But one of them has to redistrict and the other doesn't. But there are also all these crazy things that residential districts for school boards don't have to redistrict, but for towns they do. So it's really a patchwork, and the thing I would love to see would be an interim study committee on local government redistricting. Another key thing that so many clerks would favor would be to do all local redistricting at the same time, and with the expectation that you're going to re-precinct every time.
That's a
and-
key.
I'm sorry?
That's a key. That's
Yeah.
screwed up hours around Delaware County, so.
Exactly. It screws up. If you just brought the county clerks in, they would tell, them that it screws it up. So
Yeah.
there's a lot they can do that would make local government redistricting more feasible. And having a study committee where a lot of the clerks could come in and talk about it would be enormously helpful. So that's what I'm really hoping that we can persuade them with 1116 is to have a study committee before they legislate any further about any of this.
Yeah.
And I do want to make just the pitch to everybody. If you live in a county, and most of us do, that has a lot of small towns, I could really use some crowd information, crowdsourced information about which of those towns have residential districts and which of them have electoral districts, because the legislators don't know, even for their own districts, which ones have towns that are residential, which ones have electoral. So anybody who wants to help me crowdsource, that would be great. And my email's there. So
Incredible. Thank you all, to both the panelists as well to the folks at home who asked such thoughtful and important questions. Yeah, I think that is it. I'm going to pass it on over to Julia to see if she has any final words.
Not too many, just thanks to the panelists, thanks to the audience for joining us tonight. We look forward to sharing more information. If you're not on our mailing list, please join one of our organizations or follow us on social media so you're getting regular updates about what the General Assembly's doing. The session will adjourn the final week of April, so we've still got a ways to go. But again, some bad bills that we've really got to do a lot of work on between then and now to either get them stopped or get them changed so they won't be harmful to voters and make more problems for election administrators. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and hope you have a great Friday and weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, good night.